It was an ordinary night, or at least it seemed that way. The bustling city streets, the lights from the talk show studio glittering in the distance, everything seemed peaceful. But inside the show studio, a storm was brewing. The notorious Atheist talk show host Rick Harrison, known for his sharp wit and relentless commentary, was about to meet a legend, Keanu Reeves. The moment they walked on stage, you could feel the tension. Rick had spent years mocking celebrities and their beliefs, claiming religion was a crutch for weak minds. He was known for his controversial statements and sharp jabs. But tonight this was going to be different. Keanu, the beloved actor who had captured the hearts of millions, was about to sit across from him. And it wasn't just Keanu's career that Rick had his eyes on, but something deeper, Keanu's faith. As Keanu took his seat, the crowd cheered, but you could tell Rick was ready to strike. He leaned forward, smirking. "So, Keanu," Rick began, "I've heard about your deep spirituality. You believe in what exactly? Meditation? Maybe some higher power? Or are you just another celebrity searching for meaning in a world full of questions?" The audience fell silent, their eyes glued to the two men on stage. Keanu, known for his gentle demeanor and humility, didn't immediately respond. Instead, he smiled faintly, his calmness like a contrast to the sharp edge of Rick's tone. Keanu leaned back in his chair, clearly unfazed, and with a soft chuckle he replied, "I think we're all on a journey. Some of us try to make sense of the world in different ways. I believe in love, in kindness. I find strength in my connections with others and my own experiences. But spirituality for me is more about seeking truth and trying to live a good life." Rick raised an eyebrow, intrigued but still skeptical. "So you're telling me," he continued, "that love and kindness are enough for you to get by? No higher power, no divine being guiding your actions? Just vibes?" He made air quotes with his fingers, clearly enjoying the game he was playing. Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he kept his posture relaxed, his gaze steady. "Maybe there's more than just what we can see or touch," Keanu said, his voice calm but steady. "Perhaps it's about finding meaning in the way we live, the way we treat others. I think love can be a powerful force in this world. It's not about having all the answers. It's about doing your best to make a positive impact." The audience, which had initially been cautious, seemed to relax, feeling the warmth and sincerity in Keanu's words. But Rick, a master of confrontation, wasn't done yet. He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he asked, "And you really believe that love and kindness can save the world? That's it? No need for logic, reason, or science, just a nice little dose of positive energy to make everything better?" The studio air grew heavy. It was clear Rick was hoping to get under Keanu's skin, but instead, Keanu's gentle smile remained. "I think logic and reason are important," Keanu replied, unfazed by the sharpness of Rick's words. "But sometimes it's the things we can't explain that hold the most power. It's easy to dismiss the idea of something greater than ourselves, but there's a beauty in the mystery. There's beauty in the unknown." Rick's smirk faded for a moment. He had heard countless celebrities claim to have spiritual awakenings, or higher powers guiding them. But there was something different about Keanu's response. It wasn't forced, it wasn't flashy, it was grounded. The audience, sensing the shift, seemed to hang on every word. Rick cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You're basically saying that love is your guiding principle and that's enough for you to make sense of the world?" Keanu nodded slowly, his expression unwavering. "Yes, I think love is a strong force. I think it's at the core of what makes us human. If we all focused more on kindness, understanding, and respect, the world would be a different place. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that." For a moment, there was an awkward silence in the room. Rick, usually quick with a comeback, was taken aback. He had expected a back and forth, a battle of wits, but Keanu's approach had disarmed him. Instead of pushing back with logic, Keanu had offered a simple, yet powerful, message of hope and humanity. Rick blinked, almost as if, processing Keanu's words for the first time, the sharpness in his eyes softened for just a brief second. "I don't know, Keanu," Rick said, his tone a bit quieter than before. "It's just, I've spent so much time mocking these ideas, trying to find the humor in all of it, but I guess I've never really thought about it like that. Maybe there is something to the way you see things I can't really argue with kindness." The crowd, sensing the shift, began to murmur in approval. They had come to see a confrontation, but what they were witnessing was something unexpected. An open moment of reflection. Rick Harrison, the man known for tearing down others' beliefs, was actually considering the possibility that there was more to life than what he could prove through logic alone. Rick sat back in his chair, scratching his chin. "I guess in the end we all want the same thing," he said, his tone more reflective now. "We want to feel connected to something, to others, and maybe that's enough." He looked at Keanu, and for the first time that night there was genuine respect in his eyes. "You know, Keanu, maybe I've been too harsh." Keanu smiled, the calm in his eyes never wavering. "We all have our own journeys, Rick. No one's path is the same." For a moment the audience was silent. What had begun as a sharp, pointed exchange had turned into something deeper, something more meaningful. Rick Harrison, the atheist who prided himself on mocking faith, had been forced to confront his own beliefs in a way he hadn't expected. And Keanu, in his typical quiet way, had left a mark on him. Not through confrontation, but through simple kindness and sincerity. As the show drew to a close, the atmosphere in the studio was noticeably different. The audience, who had expected fireworks, had witnessed a conversation that was far more impactful. Keanu had not only shared his beliefs, but had also opened a door for others to reflect on their own. And Rick, well, he walked away with a new perspective. A conversation that started with sharp words had ended with a moment of understanding. It was a night no one would soon forget. Rick cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control of the conversation. His smirk returned, though there was a slight hesitation now. "So, you're saying there are things beyond logic?" he began. "But how do you know? It's not just wishful thinking? What if all this love and spirituality stuff is just a way to make us feel better about the reality of a harsh, indifferent world?" The audience watched with bated breath. It was clear that Rick had thrown out his most challenging argument, but Keanu, still composed, didn't flinch. He wasn't defensive. Instead, he simply responded with a calm certainty, his voice carrying a depth that reached everyone in the room. "I think that's the beauty of it," he said softly. "We all need something to believe in, something to guide us through tough times. Whether it's love, faith, or personal conviction, it doesn't matter. What matters is the impact it has on our lives. If it helps us be better people, why question its value?" For a moment, Rick was silent. The usually sharp-witted host was at a loss for words. His eyes scanned the crowd, who were now looking at him, waiting for him to continue, but he didn't. There was something in Keanu's words that had shifted the conversation in a direction he hadn't anticipated. He'd expected Keanu to buckle under the pressure, to defend his beliefs with some vague argument or weak logic. But Keanu wasn't playing by the rules Rick was used to. Instead of escalating the conflict, Keanu had grounded the conversation in something real, something that resonated with everyone in the room. Rick blinked, processing what Keanu had just said. For a brief second, he had no retort. His usual mocking tone was gone, replaced by something closer to curiosity. He glanced at Keanu, who remained patient, waiting for his reply. Rick finally spoke, his voice softer now. "I don't know, man. It's hard for me to buy into all that. I've spent so many years dissecting everything, questioning everything. But I'll admit, you're making me think twice. Maybe there is something more to what you're saying. I mean, I've always dismissed people's beliefs, thinking they were just trying to avoid reality. But now, it feels like maybe I've been missing something." Keanu smiled, not in a triumphant way, but with a genuine kindness that made his presence feel even more grounded. "It's okay to question, Rick. We all have our doubts. But sometimes, our doubts lead us to the most meaningful discoveries. It's not about having all the answers. It's about staying open to the possibility that there's something more than just what we can see and touch. The audience seemed to exhale collectively. The energy in the room shifted from tension to contemplation. They had come expecting a fiery debate, but instead, they were witnessing a real exchange of ideas. Rick Harrison, the skeptic, had been challenged by someone who didn't argue with facts, but instead with kindness and understanding. And somehow, it was working. For a moment, Rick seemed to shrink into his chair, as if the weight of the conversation had momentarily overwhelmed him. He wasn't used to being in a position where he didn't have a sharp comeback. Keanu had disarmed him, not with an argument, but with a truth that was undeniable. Love, kindness, and belief could coexist with reason, and sometimes they were more powerful. Rick finally took a breath, his posture softening. "You know, Keanu, I don't agree with everything you're saying, but..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But maybe I was wrong to dismiss it all without truly understanding it. Maybe there's something to that belief in kindness, and even if it doesn't fit neatly into my worldview." Keanu nodded slowly. "It's not about being right or wrong. It's about growing, evolving, and finding what brings you peace. We all have different ways of looking at the world. That's what makes life interesting." Rick didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat quietly, reflecting. The audience, sensing the shift, began to applaud. It wasn't just for Keanu's calmness or wisdom, but for the unexpected moment of humility from Rick as well. Rick had started the night prepared to mock and challenge Keanu's beliefs, but instead he had found himself facing something he couldn't easily argue against: a human connection based on understanding and respect. Keanu, with his humble approach, had turned the tables without ever once becoming defensive. The show ended, and as the lights dimmed, both men stood. The tension that had once filled the room had dissolved into something more profound: a quiet respect for one another's journey. For the audience, it had been an unforgettable exchange, one that would stay with them long after the cameras stopped rolling. In the end, Rick Harrison wasn't just left questioning Keanu's beliefs. He was left questioning his own, something he hadn't expected when he walked onto the stage. Rick, sensing an opportunity for one more blow, grinned and said, "All right, Keanu, let's talk about the idea of an afterlife. I mean, do you really believe in an afterlife, or is it just something to comfort you? I just don't get why people put so much stock in something they can't see or prove." The audience braced themselves for another verbal volley. But Keanu, ever the calm figure, leaned forward and said, "I think what we believe in gives us hope. Hope to do good things in this world. But if you're asking me whether I believe in an afterlife, I'd say I don't know. I've never been there. But I do know that what we do here in this life matters. What we leave behind is the legacy we create with love, kindness, and our actions." For a brief moment, Rick paused. His usual sharp retort didn't come. There was something in Keanu's words that gave him pause, something unexpected. For the first time that night, Rick found himself questioning his own stance. He had been prepared to mock Keanu, but the actor's humility and authenticity had hit him where it hurt the most: his own doubts. Rick, without realizing it, shifted in his seat. He had spent so long mocking others' beliefs that he hadn't thought about why he believed what he did. The audience could feel the change. Keanu's words were like a mirror, reflecting Rick's own uncertainties about life and faith. In that moment, Rick began to wonder if the world of certainty he had built for himself wasn't as sturdy as he had always believed. The camera caught the fleeting look of contemplation in Rick's eyes. He shifted again, this time less comfortably, as though a new question had crept into his mind. His usual bravado, the sharpness with which he would cut down anyone who questioned his worldview, seemed to lose its edge. And in that silence, Keanu's calm stillness filled the room, a contrast to the loud, fast-paced, often confrontational world Rick was used to. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned in closer. It wasn't just about the debate anymore. They weren't witnessing just another celebrity interview. They were witnessing a moment of genuine human exchange. Rick Harrison, the outspoken host, had momentarily shed his armor of sarcasm and cynicism. And the man who had set the tone for the show, Keanu Reeves, with his quiet wisdom, had, without force or aggression, subtly nudged him towards self-reflection. Rick's eyes flicked to the audience for a split second before looking back at Keanu. The air in the studio had changed. It was as if the fight had left the room, leaving only two people in an honest, unexpected conversation. It felt like the walls between them had lowered, even if just for a moment. "So you're saying we should focus on our actions here? In the present," Rick said slowly, his voice softer now. "That we should care more about the good we do, now rather than some promise of an afterlife?" Keanu nodded, still serene but with a quiet intensity. "Exactly. What we do in this world affects others, and that's what we leave behind. I don't think we need to have all the answers, but we should do our best to make this life meaningful." Rick, for the first time that evening, looked genuinely thoughtful. His usual jabs and sarcastic comments had run dry, replaced by a rare vulnerability. He exhaled slowly, his voice quieter now. "You know, I've spent years mocking these ideas. I guess I've always thought that believing in an afterlife was a way to avoid facing the harsh reality of life. But now, hearing you say that, it makes me wonder if I've been too hard on people who find comfort in faith." The audience once again fell silent. This wasn't the Rick they knew, the man who thrived on confrontation. This was a Rick who had been caught off guard by a deeper question, one that didn't have a simple answer or a witty remark. It was a question about purpose, about legacy, and about whether or not the certainty he had clung to all these years was enough to justify his skepticism. Keanu smiled warmly, but his words were simple. "We all have our doubts, Rick, and it's okay to question. It's what makes us human. But sometimes, our doubts bring us to something bigger. Maybe it's not about being right or wrong. Maybe it's about finding a way to live that's meaningful to you." Rick paused. The entire studio seemed to be holding its breath. A realization, slow but undeniable, had begun to settle on him. He'd spent years mocking people's beliefs without ever taking a step back to consider what those beliefs meant to the people who held them. He'd been so consumed by proving others wrong that he hadn't stopped to wonder whether he might be wrong himself. For a moment, Rick looked like he was on the verge of saying something profound, but instead he simply nodded. "I guess you're right," he muttered, almost to himself. "Maybe I've been too focused on tearing things down rather than understanding why people build them up in the first place." Keanu, ever humble, gave him a nod of understanding. "It's never too late to start asking questions, Rick. That's how we grow." And with that, the audience erupted into applause, not because the debate had been won or lost, but because something far more valuable had happened. A conversation that started with mockery and skepticism had ended with reflection and understanding. Rick Harrison had been challenged not by an argument but by a simple truth. Sometimes it's not about being right. It's about being open to the possibility that there's more to life than we can understand. As the applause filled the studio, Rick sat back in his chair, his mind reeling with thoughts that he had never entertained before. Keanu's calm words had not just challenged his beliefs, they had opened the door to a new way of thinking. And for Rick, that was the real shock of the evening. The moment of silence stretched. The cameras, which had been zooming in on the intense exchange, now seemed to capture something different. A shift had occurred in the conversation. Rick's playful smirk had faded into something else, something more thoughtful. He cleared his throat and then, in an unexpected turn of events, said, "You know, Keanu, I always make fun of people who are so sure of their beliefs. But I think I get what you're saying. It's not just about faith in the unknown. It's about living with purpose. Maybe I've been too harsh on people trying to find meaning." The crowd was stunned. Rick Harrison, the relentless skeptic, had just admitted that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the logic he clung to so fiercely. It wasn't just a shift in words, but in the atmosphere around them. For the first time that evening, the studio felt less like a battleground and more like a place for introspection. Keanu, ever the calm and understanding figure, smiled, and gave a gentle nod of understanding. "It's all right, Rick. Everyone's journey is different. But I do believe, whether it's through faith or something else, we all need something to guide us." The words hung in the air. The audience, initially caught in the tension of their back and forth, now sensed the deeper turn the conversation had taken. There was no more snarky back and forth, no harsh words or mocking. Just a moment of quiet understanding. The entire energy in the room had shifted from confrontation to connection. Rick sat back in his chair, his posture relaxed, his earlier smugness replaced by a genuine reflection. For the first time in the show, there was no mocking smirk, no sarcastic comment. It was just two people, two very different people, sharing something real. Rick, the skeptic who thrived on exposing flaws in others' beliefs, had, in this moment, allowed himself to see the value in those beliefs. Keanu, the actor who had always been known for his quiet wisdom, had shown that sometimes the greatest impact comes from simply being open and kind. "I guess I never really thought about it like that," Rick admitted, his voice quieter than it had been all night. "I've always been so focused on logic and proving people wrong. But what you're saying is, maybe it's okay not to have all the answers. Maybe living with purpose and kindness is enough." He looked down for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I think I've been so caught up in trying to be right that I forgot what it feels like to just listen." Keanu's smile deepened. "It's not about being right, Rick. It's about trying to do good in the world. And in the end, maybe that's all we really have control over." Rick nodded slowly, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "I never thought I'd say this, but you might be right. Maybe I've been wrong all these years, trying to break down what others believe instead of understanding why they believe it." He glanced at Keanu with a hint of respect in his eyes. "You've made me think, Keanu. I appreciate that." Keanu's response was simple. "It's okay. We all have our own paths. What matters is that we continue to grow and learn from each other." For the first time in the evening, Rick looked truly at peace. The skepticism and sarcasm that had once been his armor were gone, replaced with a genuine sense of introspection. Keanu, with his quiet grace, had helped him find a moment of clarity, something that even Rick had to admit was valuable. The audience, sensing the shift, began to applaud. It wasn't the applause of a typical talk show finale, filled with dramatic moments or comic relief. It was a deeper, more respectful kind of applause, one for the shared humanity between two men who had started the night as adversaries, but had ended it with a moment of real connection. As the lights dimmed and the show drew to a close, Rick stood up. He extended his hand to Keanu, and in that brief exchange, they shared something more than just a handshake. It was an acknowledgement of the unexpected turn their conversation had taken, a recognition that sometimes we learn the most from the moments we least expect. For Rick Harrison, the night had been a revelation. The sharp, witty host who once thrived on mocking others' beliefs had been gently reminded of the importance of living with purpose, kindness, and understanding. And for Keanu Reeves, his simple words had helped someone see beyond the walls of their own skepticism. The show may have ended, but the impact of that moment would linger far longer. As the show ended, the audience gave both men a standing ovation. The encounter had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as a challenge to Keanu's faith had turned into a moment of reflection for Rick. And Keanu, ever humble, had left the stage with the same grace he had entered. The next morning, the media was buzzing. Atheist host confronts Keanu Reeves on faith, and something unbelievable happens, headlines read. Viewers from all over the world took to social media, sharing the moment. The conversation had sparked something within many people, whether they were atheists, spiritual seekers, or somewhere in between. They began asking themselves important questions about their own beliefs. In the end, Keanu didn't just stand up for his faith. He opened a door for others to question their own beliefs and encouraged them to live with love and kindness. And as for Rick, well, his perspective had shifted, even if just a little, in a way no one could have predicted. The night had been filled with humor, wit, and tension, But it ended with something far more profound, a moment of unexpected unity. The social media conversations that followed were filled with heartfelt reflections. People from all walks of life shared how Keanu's calm and authentic response had made them rethink their own ideas of faith, love, and purpose. Many admitted that they had never really given much thought to their beliefs, and some were even inspired to explore spiritual paths they had dismissed before. It was a ripple effect, one that spread far beyond the studio, reaching hearts and minds everywhere. For Rick, the experience was transformative. He spent the following days grappling with the conversation in a way he hadn't expected. The sharpness that had once defined his career had softened, replaced by a quiet curiosity. He began to question not just the beliefs of others but the reasons behind his own skepticism. In private interviews and personal reflections, Rick admitted that Keanu had made him reconsider the role of kindness and love in shaping the world. Keanu, on the other hand, continued with his usual life, never one to boast or claim credit for his impact. However, those who knew him understood that it wasn't the challenge that mattered to him. It was the chance to show others that genuine conversations could lead to deeper insights and growth. Keanu had always believed in the importance of human connection, and that night had demonstrated the power of truly listening and understanding. The show had concluded, but the conversation was far from over. Whether in living rooms, online forums, or quiet personal reflections, people continued to think about the night's exchange. The debate that had started with sharp words and pointed questions had ended with a much more profound message: the value of kindness, of questioning our beliefs, and of connecting with others on a deeper level. In the grand scheme, it wasn't the battle between two opposing views that mattered most. What stood out was the openness and willingness to listen, to grow, and to challenge one's own perceptions. It was an unexpected unity, born from the clash of different beliefs, that left a lasting mark on both Rick and Keanu, as well as on the countless people watching from across the globe. The night had been a reminder. Sometimes the most profound moments come when we least expect them.